An 8-year-old girl's simple question brought an entire town hall to a standstill and led Donald Trump to share a rare, deeply personal story about faith, loss, and redemption. What happened next moved the whole room to tears. It was a quiet evening inside the fellowship hall of a small church in Shreveport, Louisiana. The sound of folding chairs, soft conversations, and the occasional cough filled the room. Usually, this space hosted Sunday potlucks or Bible study, but tonight was different. Donald Trump stood at the front. People recognized his face, his gestures, the way he spoke. But something about him tonight felt quieter, less showman, more serious. Maybe he sensed this wasn't a typical event. The crowd was a mix of locals, parents, older folks, small business owners, all curious to hear what he had to say. But one person stood out, not because of her size, but because of her stillness. Her name was Lily. Just 8 years old, dressed in her best Sunday dress, she held an old Bible close to her chest. It had belonged to her grandmother. The leather cover was worn, the gold letters faded, but to Lily it was a treasure. Before coming, her mother had whispered, "You can ask him your question, but only if you're brave, and only if you really mean it." Lily had nodded. She'd been practicing the question for weeks, whispering it into her pillow at night. It wasn't a question for attention. It was real. It came from her heart. Trump spoke for a while, about the country, the economy, the future. People clapped now and then, but the energy felt quieter than usual. Then the floor opened for questions. Adults lined up, asking about jobs, taxes, and even complimenting his red tie. Lily waited. Her little hands gripped the Bible tighter. Her heart was pounding. Her mom gave her a gentle nudge, so Lily stood up, legs shaking. The line in front of her felt like a mile long. People started noticing her, this small girl with the huge Bible and even bigger eyes. Finally, it was her turn. Trump looked down at her. His expression changed, softer, curious. "And what's your question, young lady?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. Lily took a breath. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "Mr. Trump," she said, "what does God mean to you?" Silence. Not a single sound in the hall. Not even a cough. Narrator tone. Slow, emotional, intense. Trump didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted from Lily's innocent face to the old, worn Bible in her tiny hands. And in that moment, something in him changed. The room could feel it. It was like even the walls were waiting to hear his reply. But there was no quick comeback, no bold slogan, only silence. Deep, real and unexpected, his usual confidence faded into something softer, almost vulnerable. He looked again at the Bible, the way she held it so tightly, like it held every answer she was hoping for. Lily shifted, just slightly, her small frame seeming even more fragile under the weight of the entire room's gaze. Her question hadn't been loud, hadn't been meant to challenge or impress. It was honest, born from a deep need to understand something bigger than herself. And somehow, that simple sincerity hit harder than any speech ever could. The room held its breath. Even the smallest sounds, the creak of a chair, the whisper of clothes, vanished. Finally, Trump raised one hand slightly, almost like steadying himself. He leaned on the podium and spoke. "That's a big question," he said, his voice lower, steadier. "And it's not one I've always had the answer to." The crowd shifted, surprised. The man known for always having a response was admitting doubt. He looked at Lily again, and this time his expression softened, almost like a father speaking to his own child. "When I was about your age," he said, "I had a lot of questions about God, too. My parents took me to church every Sunday. I remember those stained glass windows, And I'd wonder, is God even listening to me? He paused, looking out at the crowd, testing the weight of his words. My father used to tell me, faith is like a ladder. You climb it step by step. Sometimes you're scared. Sometimes you slip. But you keep climbing. Because there's something at the top worth reaching for. A faint chuckle moved through the room, but Lily didn't laugh. Her eyes stayed locked on his. She was still waiting for the real answer. Trump leaned forward. But as I grew older, he said, life tested me. I faced failure, loss, times I felt completely alone. And in those moments, I wasn't sure if God was even there. Sometimes, I was angry at him. Sometimes, I thought he'd given up on me. The room stayed silent. Not from fear, but from connection. Because this wasn't politics anymore. This was something raw, something real. But I'll tell you this, Trump continued, his voice steady now. Even in my worst moments, when I felt abandoned, I realized that faith isn't about always having the answers. It's about trusting that even in darkness, there's a reason, there's a purpose, something bigger at work. He looked at Lily one last time, and then he said gently, God, to me, he's that purpose. He's the reminder that even when we fall, even when we fail, we're not finished. He's the one, Trump said, who keeps telling us to climb the ladder, even when it feels like it's going to break. But before those words could fully settle, before the weight of them could be absorbed, something happened. Lily's eyes began to fill with tears. At first it was just one, a single drop rolling slowly down her cheek. She clutched her grandmother's Bible tighter, like it was the only thing keeping her steady. The crowd murmured softly, no one daring to interrupt the moment, but everyone sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Lily's shoulders began to tremble, not from sadness, but from something deeper, a release. Trump's words had touched something sacred, something she hadn't even known was buried inside her heart. Her mother leaned in, placing a gentle hand on her back. It's okay, sweetheart, she whispered. But Lily shook her head. This wasn't pain. It was clarity. It was healing. He looked at Lily again, and this time his expression softened, almost like a father speaking to his own child. When I was about your age, he said, I had a lot of questions about God, too. My parents took me to church every Sunday. I remember those stained glass windows, and I'd wonder, is God even listening to me? He paused, looking out at the crowd, testing the weight of his words. My father used to tell me, faith is like a ladder. You climb it step by step. Sometimes you're scared, sometimes you slip, but you keep climbing, because there's something at the top worth reaching for. A faint chuckle moved through the room, but Lily didn't laugh. Her eyes stayed locked on his. She was still waiting for the real answer. Trump leaned forward. But as I grew older, he said, life tested me. I faced failure, loss. Times I felt completely alone, and in those moments, I wasn't sure if God was even there. Sometimes, I was angry at him. Sometimes, I thought he'd given up on me. The room stayed silent, not from fear, but from connection. Because this wasn't politics anymore. This was something raw, something real. But I'll tell you this, Trump continued, his voice steady now. Even in my worst moments, when I felt abandoned, I realized that faith isn't about always having the answers. It's about trusting that even in darkness, there's a reason, there's a purpose, something bigger at work. He looked at Lily one last time, and then he said gently, God, to me, he's that purpose. He's the reminder that even when we fall, even when we fail, we're not finished. He's the one, Trump said, who keeps telling us to climb the ladder, even when it feels like it's going to break. But before those words could fully settle, before the weight of them could be absorbed, something happened. Lily's eyes began to fill with tears. At first it was just one, a single drop rolling slowly down her cheek. She clutched her grandmother's Bible tighter, like it was the only thing keeping her steady. The crowd murmured softly, no one daring to interrupt the moment, but everyone sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Lily's shoulders began to tremble, not from sadness, but from something deeper. A release. Trump's words had touched something sacred, something she hadn't even known was buried inside her heart. Her mother leaned in, placing a gentle hand on her back. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. But Lily shook her head. This wasn't pain. It was clarity. It was healing. And Trump? He noticed. He stepped away from the podium. His expression changed, softer than anyone had seen him before. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lily," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He smiled, just slightly. "That's a beautiful name." Then, with a pause that felt weighty and real, he continued. "You know, Lily, sometimes the simplest questions are the hardest ones to answer. And sometimes those questions remind us of what really matters." Lily nodded, her tear-filled eyes never leaving his. "My grandma used to say that too," she whispered. She said, "God is always listening, even when you can't hear him." Trump's face shifted again, something between admiration and a quiet ache. He took a breath, turned to the crowd. "You know," he said, "this little girl just asked a question most grown-ups are too afraid to ask." He let that hang in the air. "What does God mean to us?" The room was frozen in silence. Because it wasn't just a rhetorical question. It was personal. It was confronting. "It's not easy," Trump continued, "because it makes us look inward, face our fears, our doubts, our flaws." And in that moment, Lily, a small girl with a weathered Bible, was no longer just a child. She was a mirror, a symbol of something the entire room had forgotten: faith. Trump's voice dropped. "We live in a world," he said, "where we keep looking outside ourselves. Power, success, money, but they don't fill the empty places. The real answers?" He paused. "They make us uncomfortable. They force us to ask, what do I stand for? What do I believe in? And who am I when no one else is looking?" Then he turned back to Lily. "Thank you," he said. "You reminded me of that. You're wiser than most adults I know." The room erupted, not in wild applause, but in something gentler, something sacred, a quiet, meaningful round of claps, a collective exhale from a crowd that hadn't even realized it was holding its breath. Lily wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her dress. Her tears had stopped. Now, there was only pride, a quiet, glowing pride in her eyes. She looked up at her mother, and her mother smiled back with tears in her own. But even as the applause faded, Trump's tone shifted once more, as if to say, this wasn't over. This story, his story, was only just beginning. And the room? It grew even quieter, as though the air itself knew what was coming next. The air in the room felt thick, like time itself had slowed. Trump shifted, slightly behind the podium, his hands resting heavily as if they were carrying more than just his weight. His gaze swept across the crowd, but it landed once more on Lily. There was a deep stillness in his eyes now, something more human than anyone expected. "When I was a young man," Trump began, his voice quieter than before, "I thought I knew everything. I had goals, dreams, and the fire to chase them. I thought success meant control." He paused. The silence begged for more. "But then There was one moment, he said, that showed me just how wrong I was. The crowd leaned in. My brother Fred, Trump said, eyes distant. He was the best of us. Kind, gentle, honest. He had a light in him I never understood back then. Trump's voice cracked. Just barely, but enough for the room to feel it. But he struggled, with addiction, with pain. And no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't save him. A hush fell over the hall. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop humming. When he died, Trump continued, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was furious. At myself, at him, at God. His hand gripped the podium tighter. I couldn't understand why someone so full of love had to go and why I was left behind. For a moment, he just stood there breathing. Then one night, he said, I saw Fred's face in a dream. He was smiling, that goofy, warm smile he always had. And I heard him say, Don't be angry, Don. You've got work to do. You could have heard a pin drop. I woke up with tears on my face. And for the first time in years, I prayed. Not for answers, but for strength. He turned to Lily again, softer now. So when you ask me what God means to me, I'll tell you this, he said. God is why I keep going even when everything feels broken. He's the quiet voice in your darkest night that says, You're not done yet. Lily didn't cry this time. She just stood there, holding her grandmother's Bible close to her heart. Her little shoulders seemed stronger now, like something sacred had just been passed down. And then, from the back of the room, someone stood up. A man, older, rough around the edges. His hand was raised. His voice came next. The man stood up slowly from the back of the hall. His face was lined with years of hard work, hands rough, like someone used to turning wrenches or lifting heavy things. He looked like a mechanic, a father, the kind of man you might walk past on the street and never think twice about. But when he spoke, his voice was strong and clear, cutting through the silence like a church bell. Mr. Trump, he said, carefully, choosing each word. I've spent years trying to understand my own faith. Listening to you talk about doubt, anger, and hope makes me wonder if maybe we're all just too afraid to say we're struggling. His words hung in the air. Trump paused, almost caught off guard. But then, slowly, he leaned forward on the podium. His eyes met the man's. No distance, no act. Just one man looking at another. You know, Trump said quietly, I think you're right. Most of us, we walk around pretending we're okay, pretending we've got everything figured out. He took a breath. But the truth is, faith isn't easy. It's messy. It's loud some days and completely silent on others. Sometimes it feels like you're talking to the sky, hoping someone hears you. The crowd listened in total stillness. But that's where the power is. It's not about having all the answers. It's about showing up anyway, trying. Even when you feel lost. The man gave a slow nod, then sat back down. Around him, people murmured softly, agreeing, understanding. Then, a smaller voice rose from the front. Lily, my grandma used to say, she began, her voice light but sure, faith is like planting seeds. You don't always see them grow right away, but you have to believe they will. The whole room turned toward her. That little girl in the Sunday dress, the one who'd started it all. Trump smiled. Not his usual smirk, but something gentler. Real. Your grandma sounds like a very wise woman, he said warmly. And she's right. Faith is a seed. Sometimes you don't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not growing, quietly, deep down where no one sees. It felt like the room took a breath together. What had started as a political town hall was now something else entirely. A gathering of souls. People were no longer just voters or spectators. They were humans, with pain, with stories, with hope. Then, An elderly woman raised her hand. Her silver hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her hands trembled slightly. "I lost my husband last year," she said, voice shaking. "And I've been so angry at God since. I feel like I lost my faith completely." The silence returned, heavy, sacred. "Do you think," she asked softly, "it's too late to find it again?" Trump stepped away from the podium, closer to her. His voice dropped, steady, gentle. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's never too late. Faith doesn't disappear. It waits. And sometimes it comes back when we least expect it, in the quiet, in the pain, or in the voice of a little girl asking a big question." Tears shimmered in the woman's eyes. She nodded slowly, and all around her. Others did too. Some people dabbed at their faces with tissues. Others sat quietly, reflecting on what had just happened. But as Trump's words sank into the hearts of everyone in the room, it became clear that this evening wasn't about just questions and answers anymore. It was about connection, and what came next would deepen that bond even more. The room hummed, with a quiet energy, not from noise, but from something much deeper, a shared vulnerability. People who had come expecting a typical political talk now found themselves a part of something far more personal. It was as if Lily's simple question had opened a door no one had dared approach before. And now, no one wanted to walk away. Trump looked over the crowd, his gaze steady. "You know," he said, "there's something I've learned over the years. Faith doesn't always show up in grand moments. It's in the small ones." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "It's in the times when someone lends a hand, listens when you're hurting, or asks a brave question like Lily's." The room fell silent, everyone hanging on his every word. The power of his usual commanding voice had softened into something gentler, humble. He turned his eyes to Lily. "This little girl reminded me tonight that faith isn't just something we talk about. It's something we live. And when we live it, it spreads." Lily smiled faintly, her cheeks still flushed. Her mother pulled her close, whispering something in her ear that made the smile grow just a little bigger. Trump's voice grew firmer, but still soft. "We're living in a time when it feels like the world is pulling us apart. Politics, opinions, differences. But faith." He let the word hang in the air. "Faith has the power to bring us together. It's not about being the same. It's about understanding that we're all climbing that same ladder, one step at a time, no matter how different our paths look." A slow ripple of applause began. It grew louder. People stood, clapping, not just for Trump, but for the moment itself. For Lily's courage in asking a question that had sparked something much deeper in everyone. As the applause faded, Trump leaned forward one last time, his eyes soft. "So tonight," he said, "I'll leave you with this. Ask yourselves what faith means to you, and don't be afraid of the answer, no matter how uncertain it might be. Because faith isn't about knowing. It's about believing." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he added, "And if you found something tonight that touched you, hold on to it. Let it grow, and share it with the people who need it most." The room burst into applause once again, but this time it was punctuated with hugs, handshakes, and even a few tears. Strangers who had entered the hall just a few hours ago, barely exchanging a word, now lingered, sharing smiles, stories, and a new sense of connection. Lily, standing with her mother, watched Trump step away from the podium. He walked over to her, kneeling slightly so they were eye to eye. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice sincere and low. "You've got more courage than most people twice your age. Don't ever lose that." Lily nodded, extending her small hand to shake his. "Thank you, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice steady now. Trump smiled faintly before turning to wave at the crowd and exit. The room was alive with chatter, the people clearly moved by what had just unfolded. Lily looked up at her mother, her voice soft but determined. "Grandma would have been proud, wouldn't she?" she asked. Her mother smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "She would have been more than proud, sweetheart. She would have been amazed." As the hall slowly emptied, the message was clear. Sometimes the bravest questions lead to the most unexpected answers. And in those answers, we find parts of ourselves we didn't even know we were missing. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on your own faith. Share it with someone who might need it today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, challenge, and bring us closer together.